She was just walking home. Then a stranger grabbed her arm and said, "Pretend you're my wife." That moment should have been frightening, and it was. But it was also the beginning of something neither of them could explain. Sarah had already lost too much: her husband, her mother, and a sense of belonging. Grant had everything money could buy, but nothing he truly needed. One was invisible in her silence, the other hidden behind power and guilt. Now, picture this. It's winter in Boston. You're tired, alone, and carrying memories you never chose to keep. A stranger pulls you into his story to escape his own. Would you walk away or stay long enough to understand why? This is a story about letters never sent and lights never turned off. About the quiet kind of love that doesn't arrive with fireworks, but with a cup of tea. And how sometimes the smallest kindness can bring someone all the way back home. If this story touches you, please consider subscribing and leaving a comment below. Your voice helps keep the light on for others, too. Now, take a deep breath. Let's begin. She never expected to see anyone on that dark cobblestone path, let alone feel a stranger's hand on her arm, or hear him say the words that would freeze her still. The night had settled like an old, heavy quilt over Beacon Hill, quiet, gray, and thick with the damp chill of early December. Sarah Whitmore walked alone, her boots tapping gently against the uneven bricks. A folder of budget reports pressed tight to her chest. The wind bit through her wool coat, and the gas lamps lining the path flickered in protest against the cold. It was just after 7. The city had already curled into itself, leaving only long shadows and the distant hum of late-night traffic. She preferred walking home from the Haven Institute. It gave her time to think, to breathe, and to feel the stillness most people seemed eager to avoid. Tonight was colder than most, and lonelier too. As she neared the corner near Acorn Street, a sudden tug on her arm broke the rhythm of her thoughts. A hand firm, gloved, wrapped around her sleeve just below the shoulder. She turned sharply, heart leaping, already preparing the words, "Excuse me, let go." But before she could speak, the man leaned in. Just for a moment, he said, low and urgent, "Pretend you're my wife. Please." Her breath caught. She stepped back instinctively, looking at him fully for the first time. He was tall, in a dark wool coat that matched the tone of the night. His scarf was slightly askew, the collar of his shirt crisp beneath it. But it was his face that struck her, the kind of handsome-shaped, not by symmetry, but by wear, strong features softened by exhaustion, eyes that held the stormy blue of an ocean right before it breaks. She opened her mouth, confused, about to protest, but then she saw it, behind him, less than a block away. A group of 4 people stood beneath a lamppost. They looked elegant, like they had just left a formal event. One of them, a woman in heels too thin for winter, was scanning the street with curious eyes. Another man called out Grant. The stranger flinched, something in his posture, the tension in his jaw. The way his hand trembled slightly on her sleeve made Sarah hesitate. This wasn't a man playing a trick. He was trying to disappear, and for reasons she didn't understand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she nodded barely. He exhaled, as if he'd been holding his breath for hours. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Just come with me." Before she could decide what to make of any of it, he guided her gently but firmly down the next side street, away from the eyes still scanning the night. The cold eased slightly as they entered an older alley, narrower, quieter. The buildings here were pressed shoulder to shoulder, like elders sharing secrets. A few windows glowed with warm light, and from one of them, faint jazz music drifted into the night. They turned once more, and suddenly, she found herself standing in front of a wooden door beneath a hand-painted sign, "Rosewood's Tea and Time." He held it open for her, the brass bell above it chiming as they stepped inside. Warmth washed over her like a memory. The smell of dried rose petals and cinnamon hung in the air. Lamps with amber shades dotted the cozy space, casting a soft golden glow. There were books on every windowsill, and teacups mismatched by design on each table. The man loosened his scarf but didn't remove his coat. He guided her to a table in the far corner, away from the windows. Only then did Sarah finally speak. "I don't know you," she said quietly, heart still racing. "You touched me. You brought me here. And you want me to pretend to be your wife." He nodded once, eyes down. "I had no one else to ask," he murmured. She studied him. Everything about him felt precise, measured, except his voice that held the kind of exhaustion that comes from more than just a long day. It sounded like someone who hadn't slept well in weeks, maybe months. Still, she didn't sit. "That's not a reason." "No," he admitted, "but it's the truth." She glanced toward the window. The group that had called his name was long gone now. And yet, she remained standing, one hand still clutching her folder. Something about the way he avoided her eyes. It wasn't shame. It was grief, not fresh, not loud. The kind of grief that settles in the bones and lives there. Quietly. He looked up. "I'll pay for your tea and your time, and I'll walk you home after. I just needed someone, for a moment." She should have left. She told herself that twice, but her legs didn't move. Instead, she sat down, and when the server came, she asked for chamomile with a slice of lemon, her mother's favorite. Across from her, the stranger finally smiled just faintly. He offered his hand. "I'm Grant," he said. "Grant Holloway." Sarah didn't shake it, but she nodded, and for the next several minutes, they didn't speak at all. They simply sat there, two people warmed not by words, but by the absence of needing any. Outside, the wind continued its lonely howl through Beacon Hill. Inside, a single candle on their table flickered softly, steady and small. She hadn't meant to be here, hadn't expected this, and yet, somehow, it didn't feel like a mistake. The warmth of the teacup didn't match the chill inside her. She should have left. But something about the man's silence kept her seated. Sarah sat across from Grant Holloway in the quiet corner of Rosewoods, her chamomile tea steaming gently between them. The scent brought memories of her mother, cold nights, soft lamplight, bedtime stories. But nothing about this night felt safe or familiar. He hadn't said much since they sat down, and maybe that was what kept her there. Silence. For Sarah, had always been easier than conversation. But this was a different kind of silence. One heavy with something unspoken, like grief dressed in a tailored coat. She sipped slowly, buying time. Grant finally leaned forward, fingers cradling the edge of his cup. "I owe you an apology," he said. His voice was deeper than she remembered from earlier, less urgent, still low, but gentler now. "That was uncalled for. What I asked, and how I did it." Sarah didn't answer right away. Her hands were still tight around her cup, not from cold, but from caution. "I've had stranger evenings," she said softly, though that wasn't true. He offered a tired smile. "Still thank you. I don't usually need help disappearing." "Who were they?" she asked. He hesitated, then answered, "Investors. Old ones. People I wasn't ready to face tonight." She studied him for a beat, then set her cup down. "You could have just walked away." "I could have," he nodded, "but you were standing there like someone the world wouldn't question. And I needed cover. Cover." She raised an eyebrow. "A quiet presence," he said. "Someone who didn't demand answers." Sarah almost laughed but didn't. He wasn't flattering her, just observing, and, oddly enough, it felt true. After a few more minutes of quiet, Grant reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card. Simple. Matte ivory, just a name, embossed in silver. Grant Holloway, founder and CEO. Holloway Biosystems. Her fingers paused mid-air. She'd heard that name before. In passing conversations, medical news blurbs, community panels on ethical funding. A man known for turning orphaned ideas into global treatments. Brilliant, ambitious, famously reclusive. And now, seated across from her, with tired eyes and tea-stained hands. She blinked. "You're that Grant Holloway." He gave a small, resigned shrug. Unfortunately, the moment felt odd, lopsided, like discovering the stranger who borrowed your umbrella was also the one funding half the city's hospitals. Sarah tucked the card into her coat pocket without looking at it again. He didn't elaborate, didn't explain what someone like him was doing, slipping through back alleys, avoiding people with designer coats and perfect teeth. And she didn't ask. The bill arrived. Grant paid it without question, leaving a generous tip. As they stood to leave, he walked her to the door, holding it open like they were old friends, or something closer. Outside, the cold had deepened. A soft mist hung in the air, clinging to brick and breath alike. "I'll walk you home," he offered. Sarah hesitated, then shook her head. "It's only a few blocks. I'll be fine." He nodded, not pressing. "Thank you again, Mrs. Holloway." That earned him a half smile. She turned and walked toward the corner, her footsteps quiet on the bricks. At the edge of the street, she glanced back. He was still there, standing beneath the flickering gas lamp, hands in his pockets, face unreadable. She almost waved, but didn't. The next morning began like any other. Sarah moved through her morning routine with mechanical calm. Shower, toast, Earl Grey, gray wool skirt, low heels. Her desk at the Haven Institute was still stacked with reports from the youth arts program and the new funding proposal she'd been revising. Mira, her colleague of 10 years, popped her head into Sarah's cubicle around 9:15. "Big announcement in the conference room," she said. "You coming?" Sarah nodded, though she didn't move right away. She joined the others 5 minutes later, taking a quiet spot near the back wall as the executive director stood by the projector screen, beaming. "As many of you know, we've been seeking a long-term philanthropic partner to help us expand our outreach in Beacon Hill and the surrounding neighborhoods." The director began, "Today. I'm thrilled to share that we've secured one." Sarah leaned against the back wall, sipping from her ceramic thermos. Her mind wandered to the candle on that little table at Rosewood's, to the weight in Grant's voice when he said he needed someone who wouldn't ask questions. The screen behind the director changed. A name appeared. Holloway Biosystems, Grant Holloway, founder and CEO. Her breath caught mid-sip. Her fingers tightened around the mug. The room broke into polite applause. Mira whispered, "That's huge. They fund entire clinics." But Sarah didn't hear the rest. She sat down slowly in the nearest chair, the edges of her vision going soft. Some people talk to therapists. She wrote letters, dozens of them, all addressed to someone who no longer existed. Sarah kept them in a small wooden box under her bed. No lock, no label, just the faint scent of dried lavender clinging to the corners. Inside were folded pages neatly creased, yellowing slightly at the edges, each beginning with the same 3 words, "My dearest James." She never sent them. There was no one to send them to. Her husband had died 5 years ago. A car accident, rain, a sharp turn on an unfamiliar road. The kind of tragedy that arrives not with warning, but with silence. One day, you are waiting for someone to come home with groceries and a story about a rude cashier. The next, you're standing in a hospital hallway with blood under your nails from clutching the steering wheel too tightly. James had been kind, ordinary in the best ways. The kind of man who remembered to water the plants and always returned the library books on time. He was the only person who ever made Sarah laugh in the mornings. When he was gone, the world didn't end. It just quieted. She didn't cry in public, didn't take a leave from work. She learned how to carry grief the way some people carry arthritis invisible, but always there. Some days dull, some days unbearable, but always present. And so, she wrote letters. At first, they were daily pages filled with updates, questions, confessions, later, weekly, then only when the ache returned so sharply she couldn't sleep. They weren't dramatic, just honest, the things she couldn't say aloud, the memories she was afraid time would steal. Her apartment on the second floor of a brick building in the South End was small but clean. 2 windows faced the alley, One shelf held the books she couldn't part with. Another carried a small framed photo of James, taken during their last summer together at the Cape Sunburned, laughing, holding a melting ice cream cone. Next to the photo was a ceramic jar where she kept her pens and old stationery. Some pages were floral, others plain cream, but all were used with care. That Sunday afternoon, after the long week with the announcement about Grant Holloway and the project at Haven, Sarah needed air, but instead of walking the city, she opened the closet at the end of the hallway and pulled out a cardboard box labeled Mom. It had been years since she opened it. Her mother had passed just 6 months after James. That was the year everything dimmed. Inside were simple things, a wool scarf still smelling faintly of rosewater, handwritten recipes, and a tattered copy of Anne of Green Gables, her mother's favorite. And at the bottom, a thick, leather-bound guest book from the old Beacon Hill Library. The library had once been the heart of their neighborhood, a narrow brick building with ivy climbing its walls and a bell above the green-painted door. Sarah had practically grown up there. Her mother was the head librarian, strict with late fees, but soft with children. Every Thursday after school, Sarah would sit at the wide oak desk by the bay window and do homework while her mother shelved books. When the pandemic hit, the funding dried up. The building was closed, boarded, forgotten, but not by Sarah. She still walked past it sometimes, still paused at the front steps, still saw, in her mind, her mother through the glass, waving, a stack of books in her arms. As she flipped through the guest book, names from decades past smiled up at her. Children with rounded handwriting, notes of thanks, little drawings. Her own name appeared, once, in block letters. Sarah W., age 9. Then, tucked between pages near the back, something fell out, a letter, faded blue ink on cream paper, her mother's handwriting loopy and familiar, but it wasn't addressed to anyone. The first line simply read, "If someone finds this, it means I couldn't say it out loud." Sarah froze. Her fingers trembled slightly as she read on. The letter wasn't long, just a few lines about keeping memories alive, about how not all good things need to last forever, but they should be remembered, honored, lit from within. Then, at the bottom, in a different pen, read, rushed, less neat, were 4 words scrawled at an angle. "Keep the lights on." Sarah blinked at the page. There was no signature, no explanation, just that one sentence. She read it again. Keep the lights on. Was it literal? A request? A metaphor? A memory? She didn't know, but something about it felt urgent, intentional, like a message sent across time, waiting for her to be ready to hear it. She stood, walked to the window, and looked out. The afternoon light was fading. The city was slipping into that soft blue hour when shadows stretch, and the past feels closer than it should. She thought about the library, about the dusty shelves, the oak desk, the lamps that once glowed golden over borrowed stories and whispered dreams. She thought about her mother, about James, about Grant Holloway's tired eyes and the odd way his voice held the weight of remembering. Keep the lights on. Was it a plea, a promise, or a door waiting to open? Grant Holloway, billionaire, innovator, but tonight, in the staff meeting, his voice broke like someone trying to hold in a storm. The fluorescent lights in the Haven Institute's conference room buzzed faintly overhead. The long table was surrounded by department leads, community coordinators, and 2 board members dialing in from New York. A plate of half-eaten cookies sat ignored near the coffee urn. Sarah sat 2 chairs from the end, her notepad open, pen poised, though she hadn't written a word. Grant stood at the front, sleeves rolled to the elbows, no tie, the glow from the projector casting soft shadows across his face. On the screen behind him, blueprints rotated slowly, renderings of a community center, gardens, event spaces, even a rooftop library. The presentation was smooth. Every slide had been curated, every word rehearsed. But when he reached the part labeled Beacon Hill Project, Phase 1, something shifted. He cleared his throat, glanced toward the image of a brick building outlined in faded red marked for demolition. I know this piece of land means a lot to the community, he said, voice steady at first. It's been vacant for years, boarded up, unused, forgotten, almost. Sarah sat straighter. But, Grant continued, we don't want to erase what it was. We want to honor it, to build something that remembers, that serves, a space for learning, for gathering, for light. His voice caught slightly on that last word, light. And Sarah, though she hadn't meant to, held her breath. Mira, sitting beside her, leaned in just a little. You all right? She whispered. Sarah nodded, eyes still on the screen, but her hands had curled into fists in her lap, because she knew that building. It wasn't just vacant land. It was her mother's library, her own childhood, her Thursdays by the window, the bell above the green-painted door, forgotten. Not by her, not ever. She felt the heat rising in her chest, not quite anger, but something heavier. The quiet ache of watching a memory you've tried so hard to protect get flattened into a blueprint. The meeting rolled on. There were questions about zoning, partnerships, press releases. Grant answered them all with the polished calm of someone who'd done this 100 times. But Sarah noticed how his hand rested flat on the table, fingers pressing down slightly, as if to keep something inside from surfacing. After the final slide faded, people began to gather their things. Mira stood and stretched, then turned to Sarah. You went pale back there. What is it? Sarah hesitated. That building used to be my mother's library. Mira's expression softened. Oh, sweetheart. I didn't know. She worked there for 30 years, Sarah murmured. We lived just 3 blocks away. It was everything. You should tell him, Mira said gently. Let him know what it means to you. Sarah shook her head. It wouldn't change the plan. No. Mira agreed. But maybe it would change the intention. Back at her desk, Sarah flipped open her planner, more out of habit than purpose. Her mind kept replaying that pause in Grant's voice, that flicker, that one-word light. She reached for her mug, lukewarm now, and noticed a manila envelope on top of her inbox tray. Inside was a memo. Subject, Beacon Hill Redevelopment Project. Internal appointments. Her name was listed second, Sarah Whitmore, Executive Assistant to Grant Holloway, Phase Owned, Implementation Team. She stared at the page, not just copied in, not part of a team, assigned, directly, to him. The breath she'd been holding slipped out. She reread it twice, as if the ink might change its mind. Later that evening, after most of the office had emptied, Sarah sat alone at her desk, the lights dimmed to half. Outside, the December wind picked up, rattling a loose piece of siding somewhere on the building. She checked her email one last time before shutting down. Among the usual memos and committee updates, one new message had arrived just minutes earlier, from Grant Holloway. Subject about that night. No preview text, no attachments. Just those 3 words sitting in her inbox like a stone in still water. She didn't open it. Not yet. She stared at the screen a long while, the cursor blinking slowly beside the sender's name. The same man who stood in front of a boardroom tonight, talking about building hope, was also the man who, just days ago, had grabbed her arm on a deserted street and asked her to be his wife for 60 seconds and no questions asked. And now, he wanted to talk about it. Some rooms disappear, others survive only in memory. But the ones built with love, they wait. It had been years since Sarah stood in front of the old library on Beacon Street. The vines had long since died back. The green door, once cheerfully chipped and worn from use, now sat behind a rusted security gate. The windows were dusted over with grime, but the shape of the building remained unmistakable, narrow, modest, steady, like a memory refusing to be erased. She didn't speak as Grant stepped beside her, clipboard in hand. He was reviewing a layout document, talking softly to the architect who accompanied them. But his voice faded as his eyes lifted to the structure before them. This place is smaller than I remembered, he said quietly. Sarah glanced at him, but didn't respond. She was too busy watching a particular second-floor window, the one with the curved edge. Behind that window had been the children's reading corner, and just beneath it, tucked into the back of the room, was the oak armchair where her mother used to sit on slow afternoons, reading aloud to whichever child wandered near. That chair had felt like the heart of the whole building. It had creaked when her mother shifted. It smelled faintly of lemon polish and old cloth. And in her most exhausted moments, Sarah often imagined herself curled up beside it again, listening to a voice that could no longer speak. She swallowed. Inside, the air was colder than expected. Dust hung in the light beams breaking through the cracked glass. Shelves stood bare, their outlines still etched into the walls where books had once leaned for decades. The floor creaked with every step, but the structure itself was sound. Sarah walked slowly, trailing her fingers along the edge of a long-forgotten circulation desk. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. The room spoke for itself of whispered questions, turned pages, and the quiet dignity of people seeking more than they had. Behind her, Grant was speaking with the contractor, asking about supports, about natural light, about how much of the original interior could be preserved. Sarah wandered toward the back, toward the corner where the children's section had been. The oak chair was still there, covered in a thin sheet, frayed at the legs, but unmistakable. She froze for a long moment before carefully kneeling beside it, brushing dust off the armrest with the sleeve of her coat. Grant appeared behind her, silent for a beat. "Beautiful piece," he said softly. She nodded, keeping her gaze on the wood. "My mother loved that chair." He didn't question it, didn't ask the kind of things most people might, just stood there, hands in his coat pockets, gaze steady. After a pause, he walked toward a window and leaned against the frame. "I came here once," he said. "I was maybe 16. Sarah turned, curious despite herself. "It was raining," he went on, eyes distant. "I'd run away, not far, just enough to make a point. I didn't have anywhere to go. Ended up walking these streets until I saw this place. It looked warm." He gestured toward the room. "It was open, late, I think. I wandered in, wet, angry. No idea what I was even looking for." He smiled faintly. "And this woman, older, kind eyes. Gray cardigan, she didn't ask questions. She just handed me a towel and a book." Sarah's breath caught. She didn't tell me what to do, or where to go. She just sat beside me, turned on the lamp, and said, "Don't ever give up on the light, even when it feels like no one's watching." Sarah's chest tightened. A quiet ache bloomed behind her ribs. That cardigan, that phrase, that kind of gentleness. It sounded exactly like her mother. Grant shook his head, a bit embarrassed. "I thought I imagined it for years, but I remember every word she said." It stayed with me longer than most advice ever did. Sarah stood, brushing her hands on her coat. She wanted to tell him, wanted to say. That was my mother. Wanted to ask. Did she smile the way she always did? With the corner of her lip dipping slightly, but something held her back. Maybe it was the fragility of the moment, the way his voice trembled slightly, like it was balancing on the edge of something sacred. Some memories deserve to stay unnamed so they can keep glowing softly, untouched by confirmation. Instead, she walked to the window beside him. They stood there in silence, watching the dust dance in the fading light. And then Grant said it. "I'm keeping the lights on, in my own way." Sarah turned to him. It wasn't just a figure of speech. There was something in the way he said it. Something that echoed the words in her mother's old letter, the ones written in red, hurried and urgent, pressed into paper like a final whisper. "Keep the lights on." Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the plastic tarp covering part of the building. A small shaft of sun broke through the clouds, casting a pale beam onto the floor where the children's carpet had once been. Sarah didn't speak, didn't need to, because something inside her shifted, not dramatically, not like a door flinging open, more like a lock quietly clicking free. 1000 T Laos V N Xiuoi Sao El Nang Inang NH N E Tam Chui N B N Ro. Foo, HPTTS. She believed in data, not instinct, in facts, not feelings. But even numbers lie, sometimes. Sarah had always trusted numbers more than people. People change their minds. People make promises they forget. But numbers stayed. They followed rules. They fit into columns. They left trails. Which is why, on a cold Thursday afternoon, Sarah didn't need anyone to tell her something was wrong. It was all there, tucked between two Excel tab cells, D19 through D25, where a six-figure transfer had been quietly labeled community engagement, substructure reassessment. Harmless enough, except that line hadn't been in last week's budget. And there were two transfers, not one. The first was dated 3 days after the site visit to the old library. The second, this morning. Her fingers hovered over the trackpad. The number was large, the destination vague, and the terminology site readying vague enough to mean anything, or everything. She clicked open the internal approval memo. There it was. At the bottom of the page, signed Grant Holloway. At first, her heart sank with guilt. Maybe she had misunderstood. Maybe this was just part of the standard process. But her eyes caught something. The font. Times New Roman. She frowned. Grant never used that font. His contracts, letters, even internal emails always Garamond. Clean, classic. A detail most wouldn't notice. But Sarah did. She noticed everything. That was her job. That was her armor. She pulled up an earlier document one Grant had reviewed and approved last week. The signature block was the same, but the font, Garamond, margins aligned, formatting flawless. But on this new one, off by 0.5 centimeter, no version history, no review notes. It felt wrong, quietly, precisely wrong. She printed both memos and laid them side by side on her desk. It wasn't just the font. The header alignment was off. The spacing between signature and text too wide. The digital signature looked correct, but the metadata showed a different upload path. Her stomach began to twist. She opened her email and typed slowly, subject clarification on budget line 3B. But then she stopped, stared at the blinking cursor. Because if she was right, if someone had forged Grant's approval, then alerting him first might erase the only proof she had. She saved the draft and closed her laptop. A soft knock came at her doorframe. She turned, startled. It was Cole Grant's assistant. Perfect posture, perfect part in his hair. iPad tucked tightly under his arm. "Hey, Sarah," he said lightly. "Just checking you saw the updated schedule Grant's hoping to bump up the contractor meeting to early next week." Sarah blinked. "That soon?" "Yeah, weather's turning. We don't want snow delays for the clearance." "Clearance?" The word echoed. She offered a neutral nod, watching his face carefully. "Anything you need help with?" Cole asked. She hesitated. "Just reviewing some approval chains. Making sure the new expenses are all in sync." Cole's smile tightened just a little. Good. Yeah. Sometimes things move fast this phase. Appreciate your diligence." And just like that, he was gone. Sarah sat back in her chair. That smile, too polished, too quick. She opened her laptop again and started digging deeper, not into the budget system, but into Cole's metadata trail. She had limited admin access, but enough to view timestamps. That memo signed by Grant uploaded from Cole's login, not Grant's. And the time, 6:13 of... That wasn't unusual. Cole often arrived early. But Grant. He rarely logged in before 8. Her hand trembled slightly as she minimized the screen. This was no longer a formatting error. She spent the next hour cross-referencing every approval connected to the Beacon Hill project over the past 30 days. Most were clean. A few had minor inconsistencies, nothing alarming. But the site clearance memo stood out, like a puzzle piece sanded at the edges to make it fit. Was Grant aware? Was he complicit? Or was someone using his name while he focused on building dreams? Her heart pulled in two directions. One voice whispered, He's the one who said I'm keeping the lights on. He remembered your mother. He looked at that library like it mattered. But another voice cut in sharper. He's also the man with a billion-dollar company, public image to uphold, and a deadline to hit. Words are easy. Blueprints don't lie. Sarah stared at the memo again. His name, not his signature. Her gut twisted. The office was nearly empty now. The only sound was the faint murmur of a radio in the hallway, and the tap-tap of her own pen hitting the desk. Snow had started again, thick, wet flakes sticking to the windows. She opened her leather-bound journal, the same one where she'd once written to James, where she kept the thoughts she didn't say aloud. She wrote one line, "Is he just pretending to care?" She sat back, read it again, then underlined it, twice. That building had no electricity, but last night she saw a light from inside, a warm, flickering light that shouldn't exist. Sarah hadn't meant to walk that way. She'd left the office late, her thoughts tangled with doubt. The forged memo, the early morning login from Cole's account, the way Grant had said one thing and the documents suggested another. She needed air, and without planning it, her feet led her to Beacon Hill. Snow coated the brick sidewalks like powdered sugar. Boston street lamps glowed amber against the white, and the world felt soft, muffled, as if holding its breath. When she reached the corner where the old library stood, she stopped short. There, behind the front window barely visible through the dusty pane, was a light. Not the sharp blue-white of fluorescence, but warm, flickering, like a flame. Sarah blinked. The building had no power. She remembered the city reports utilities cut off in 2020, and yet, there it was, a glow that danced slightly, as if someone had just walked by. She crossed the street slowly, crunching softly through snow, and peered inside. The library was dark, mostly silent. But near the center of the room, where the children's reading rug had once been, a small lantern sat on the floor, oil-fed, brass handle, flame steady, golden. She stood frozen, heart quickening. No one else was inside. No fresh footprints in the snow. No signs of forced entry. The gate remained locked, the door sealed, but the light was real. She returned the next morning, this time with purpose. Keys borrowed from facilities under the guise of a preliminary spatial review. No one questioned her. She was project secretary now. With that came access. The cold bit at her skin as she stepped inside. But the library welcomed her like it remembered. Same creaking floorboards, same scent of aged wood and forgotten paper. And there it was, the lamp, still burning, low but alive. Beside it, a small metal tin. She knelt, heart in her throat, and opened the lid. Inside an envelope, folded invoice paper, crisp. She unfolded it carefully, scanning the top. Eversource Energy, customer W. G. Holloway service address, 127 Beacon Street. Reading room, sub-meter status. Active duration, continuous since December 2020. Sarah stared at the page. Her eyes moved slowly over the lines. Paid in full, auto-renewed, no lapses, no late payments. 3 years. Someone had kept the lights on. Quietly, faithfully, without recognition or reward. She looked at the name again. W. G. Holloway, Grant's full name, William Grant Holloway. The name she'd only seen in fine print, never spoken aloud. It hit her like warmth in winter. He had never let this place go dark, not after funding was pulled, not during the pandemic, not even when no one was watching. He had kept it alive, secretly, in silence. Sarah sat down on the edge of the old rug, knees pulled close, the lamp flickering beside her. It didn't make sense. The forged memo, the vague budget lines, the assistant with the too-perfect smile. None of it fit with this quiet act of devotion, unless Grant wasn't the one pulling strings. Unless he didn't know about the false signature. Unless he'd meant every word in that empty room when he said, "I'm keeping the lights on, in my own way." She thought about the chair where her mother used to sit, the way the dust hadn't fully settled on its arms like someone had touched it recently, like someone visited, often. Her fingers brushed the brass handle of the lamp. It was old, the kind of object someone keeps only if it means something, a hand-me-down, a memory, and suddenly, she saw it. A much younger Grant rain-soaked, 16, scared walking through that door, being handed a towel and a book by a woman with a gray cardigan. Maybe this wasn't just a library to him. Maybe it was the first place someone showed him kindness without asking anything in return. Maybe he never meant to take it away. Maybe he was trying to give it back. She stood slowly and walked toward the front door. Her hand rested on the worn brass knob, thumb running over the groove carved by decades of readers coming and going. And in that moment, she felt it, the hum of memory, the quiet ache of understanding, the flicker of light not from the lamp, but from somewhere deeper. Not every act of care is loud. Some are paid month by month, in shadows, with no one watching. Sometimes, the truth doesn't shout. It waits in silence, hoping someone brave enough will ask for it. Sarah had never been the kind of woman who liked confrontations, but tonight she was holding a folder of printed lies, and she couldn't ignore the weight of silence anymore. Grant's office door was slightly ajar, light glowing faintly through the frosted glass. Inside, he sat at his desk, glasses perched low on his nose, staring not at a screen, but at something handwritten, maybe a draft, maybe something older. He looked up when she stepped in. "Sarah," he said simply, no surprise in his voice. She didn't answer right away. She walked in, closed the door behind her, and placed the folder on his desk. Budget line, 3B, site clearance memo. The signature doesn't match. He looked at the folder, but didn't reach for it. She kept her voice even. The metadata shows it was uploaded from Cole's credentials. At 6:13 a.m. You usually don't log in before 8. A pause. Then he exhaled, the kind of breath that sounds like surrender. "I know," he said quietly. Sarah froze. "You knew I found out last week." That stopped her. She took a step back. "And you didn't say anything." He rubbed a hand across his face, tiredness showing in the lines near his eyes. "If I take this public," he said, "it becomes a scandal. It puts the entire Haven network at risk. 4 new shelters are waiting on matching funds. The pediatric clinic in Roxbury just signed the lease. Donors are watching every move we make. So you just let it happen." "No," he said, firmer now. "I fired him. Quietly. I canceled all pending disbursements tied to that memo. But if I go on record, the media will spin it. And those buildings won't get built. People who need us, they lose more than we do." She stood there, caught between anger and understanding. The air felt heavier somehow. Grant leaned forward and opened the drawer of his desk. From inside, he took out a small wooden box, no larger than a cigar case, and untied the string wrapped twice around it. Inside were letters, not printed emails, not memos, letters, old, creased, handwritten on lined paper. He passed one to her. She unfolded it carefully. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. "To my quiet boy," it began. Her eyes moved across the page. "Even when the world feels cruel, let kindness be your rebellion." He spoke softly. "I grew up in a group home in western Massachusetts. I was small, bookish, easy to overlook." He looked at the box. Every month, a librarian from town would come by. She brought paperbacks, sometimes cookies, but more than that, she brought letters. Sarah stayed still, heart slowing, from volunteers. He continued. People across the state who believed that words mattered. They didn't know us, but they wrote, shared stories, weather updates, quotes, recipes, little windows into lives we couldn't imagine. He smiled faintly, looking at the letter she held. "This one wrote to me for a year. Same penmanship. same paper, always signed off as a friend of light. Sarah's fingers gripped the letter just a little tighter. "That's why you kept the power on," she said quietly. "At the library." He nodded. "It was the only place I ever felt seen. Just once. Just for a moment. I didn't want it to go dark, even if no one else cared." Silence filled the space between them. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't cold. It was the kind of silence that held stories. Sarah's eyes moved from the letter back to Grant. She saw not the CEO who stood in boardrooms, but the boy who once waited for mail that may or may not arrive. "I used to write letters too," she said softly. His gaze lifted. "After James died, and after Mom passed, I couldn't talk to people. But I could write. I have a box of unsent letters under my bed, some to them, some to no one, really." She hesitated, then unbuttoned her coat and reached inside her bag. From a side compartment, she pulled out a pale blue envelope, slightly crumpled, worn at the edges. She crossed the space between them and laid it gently on his desk, beside the wooden box. "You're not the only one who believes in letters," she whispered. He didn't open it, just looked at it, and then at her. No words, just quiet recognition. Outside, snow began to fall again, dusting the windows in soft streaks of white. Inside, something shifted, not loudly, not all at once. But like the slow turning of a page, they didn't rebuild a library. They rebuilt a promise. No camera crews arrived, no ribbons slashing. Just quiet snow falling over Boston's red brick sidewalks, and the low hum of neighbors arriving one by one, boots wet and cheeks red from the cold. The old Beacon Hill Library had new life now, but it hadn't been turned into something grand or sleek. It had become something gentler. Above the door, in hand-carved oak, was a single name, the letters room. Inside, the scent of polished wood mingled with dried lavender and tea. Candles flickered in glass holders on each table. The windows, once boarded, now welcome morning light through soft linen curtains. Every corner whispered with memory, carefully restored, not replaced. And at the center of it all stood Sarah. She had never imagined this would be her path. Not when she first took the assistant job. Not when she saw that flicker of light through the library window that cold night. But now, every morning, she turned the brass key in the door, lit the same oil lantern she once found glowing by itself, and welcomed those who came not with forms to fill or IDs to show, but with silence, space, and a place to leave what weighed heavy, because that was the rule of the letters room. You didn't have to explain. You could write a letter and seal it, leave it open, sign your name, or let it stay anonymous. Every voice mattered. Every memory belonged. In the weeks after opening, people came from all across the city. An elderly man who once rode the train to visit this library as a boy now brought the letters he and his late wife exchanged in college. A high school teacher donated a binder full of apology notes written by students caught cheating. She'd kept them for 30 years, not out of punishment, but to remember how people grow. One woman placed a single letter in the box, addressed only to the one I lost too early. She whispered, "This is the only place I trust to keep it." The room slowly filled not just with pages, but with presence. One wall was transformed into a living archive, rotating displays of selected letters with permission, writings from decades past, journal entries from unknown hands, even some that had arrived by mail from other states. On a cold Saturday morning, a delivery arrived, no return address. Inside a bundle of 60 folded notes, one for each year of a man's marriage. Each began the same way: "Good morning, love, you're still my favorite hello." Sarah read them in private before tucking them safely into the velvet-lined drawer, marked Enduring Promises. The community began leaving more than just letters. People brought objects, small mementos to sit beside their words. A faded baseball ticket, a hand-knitted glove with a missing thumb, a cracked ceramic bird once perched on someone's mother's kitchen windowsill. No one questioned it. Everything belonged. And then one day, as Sarah sat by the writing desk, her fingers brushing the edge of a note card, She hadn't yet started, a voice spoke beside her. Soft, high, curious. "Excuse me," the little girl asked. "Who are you writing to?" Sarah turned. The child stood with her mittens balled in one hand and a red scarf wrapped too many times around her neck. Sarah smiled. "That's a good question." "Is it a secret?" the girl asked. Sarah looked at the page. She hadn't written a name yet. Only a line. Sometimes we don't realize someone's been keeping the light on until we see the room they saved. She looked back at the child and answered softly, "No, not a secret. Just someone I owe a thank you to." The girl tilted her head. "What did he do?" Sarah thought for a moment, then said, "He kept the light on for me, even when I didn't know his name." The girl's eyes widened, like she'd just heard a spell. "That sounds like magic," Sarah smiled. "Maybe it is." That night, after the last guest had gone and the candles had been snuffed, Sarah walked to the back of the room. There was a wooden box now, built by a retired carpenter who said his wife used to write poems but never showed them to anyone. He donated the box so other people's quiet words wouldn't get lost like hers did. Sarah opened the lid gently. Inside were that day's letters, carefully placed, some typed, others written with trembling hands, some with flowers pressed inside, one sealed with wax. She added her own. It was written in blue ink on thick paper, folded once, no name. On the outside of the envelope, she had written, "Some lights shine in silence. That's why they were remembered." She closed the lid and ran her hand across the smooth wood, then walked slowly to the front of the room and turned off every light except one, the oil lantern by the oak reading chair. It flickered softly, casting shadows that looked like wings. And in that moment, Sarah understood something she never had before. This wasn't just about a building saved. It was about all the letters no one thought would matter, and all the people who finally had a place to be remembered. No love was declared, no promises made, just 2 cups of tea, placed side by side, waiting for someone to return. The snow had melted into slush on Beacon Street that afternoon. March wind still held the sharp edge of winter, but the sun stayed just a little longer now, stretching golden fingers across the cobblestones, reaching for the corners that had spent months in shadow. Inside the letters room, Sarah swept the floor slowly, one hand guiding the worn bristles, the other adjusting her shawl. It was quiet, her favorite kind of quiet, the kind that hummed with presence. The lantern near the oak chair flickered gently. A child's drawing, recently tacked to the wall, danced slightly in the draft. It showed the room from a child's view, lots of yellow, lots of hearts, and a big sign that said, "This place listens." She smiled at that. Everything had changed, but nothing felt forced. Cole had been officially dismissed months ago, though not a single headline printed the story. Grant had kept it quiet, as promised. An internal ethics team handled the fallout. Donors were reassured, and the Beacon Hill project restructured. But this time, there was no demolition, no glass and steel replacement. The old building stayed, because it mattered. The residents who had contributed letters continued to visit some weekly. Some only once, but always with reverence. Mira, Sarah's former colleague, now helped catalog submissions for a digital archive. The veteran who brought his wife's wartime letters had offered to build new wooden benches for the side courtyard once spring arrived. Even the woman from Iowa who sent that mysterious envelope. She had sent another. This one simply read, "Thank you for keeping a space like this in the world. I needed it more than I knew." Sarah took 2 ceramic cups from the shelf, handmade by a local artist, and filled them with herbal tea, chamomile, with just a touch of lavender and honey. She placed them carefully on the small round table by the window. No coaster, no napkin, just a quiet offering. She didn't know why she poured 2 cups. Or maybe she did. Sometimes. The body knows what the heart hasn't caught up to yet. She walked back to the writing desk and sat, fingers tracing the spine of a worn notebook. Outside, the sky turned the soft blue of evening, and then the bell above the door chimed. She turned slowly, not startled, but certain. Grant stood in the doorway. No coat this time, just a dark sweater, slacks, and snow-damp boots. He looked less like a CEO and more like a man who had finally stopped running. He didn't speak, just smiled. Sarah smiled back. He took a few steps in, looking around not like a guest, not like a benefactor, but like someone returning to something held, not owned. His eyes paused on the letters wall, now overflowing with folded thoughts and untold truths. Then he turned toward the table by the window. 2 cups, still warm. He raised an eyebrow, quietly amused. "I hoped," she said softly, "you might come." He sat. There were no grand declarations, no speeches. They talked, but not about themselves. They spoke of the children who had begun writing anonymous thank you notes and leaving them for strangers. About the idea of opening a second letters room in New Haven. About the woman who left a recipe for her mother's lemon pound cake as her final letter before moving into assisted living. They laughed at the simplicity of it all, then went quiet again. But it wasn't awkward, it was complete. As twilight deepened, the lights inside took on a golden hue. From where they sat, the glass reflected part of their faces blurred at the edges, warm in the middle. Sarah looked down. Her hand had moved slightly, almost without her realizing it. It now rested near his, not quite touching, but close enough to feel the warmth. Grant didn't pull away, didn't press forward. He simply stayed. There was no need for, "I love you." Presence had said enough. 2 hands, resting close, 2 lives, no longer in flight. They watched the lantern flicker on the far shelf, and Sarah whispered not for him, not even for herself, but for the air between them. Some lights guide you home. Others teach you how to stay. Grant turned toward her, then not to respond, but to listen. That, after all, was what they had learned here. To listen, to stay, to hold space. Outside, the street lamps blinked on. Snow began again, soft, hesitant. Inside the letters room, the light did not flicker. It pulsed gently, as if breathing. And behind the thick glass window, 2 cups of tea waited empty now, but still warm. Not because of heat, but because someone had chosen to return, and someone else had chosen to be there when they did. In a world that often rewards noise and speed, this story reminds us of the quiet power of stillness, kindness, and being present. Sometimes, the most meaningful acts are not loud declarations, but small choices keeping a light on for someone who might come back. Writing a letter even when no one may read it, or simply sitting beside someone without asking them to speak. As we grow older, we carry more memories, some cherished, others heavy. But healing doesn't always come from fixing the past. Often, it comes from holding space for it, from offering presence without pressure, and from realizing that we, too, are still worthy of connection, no matter what we've lost. You don't have to save the world to matter. You just have to be the kind of person who keeps the light on for others, and for yourself, because one day, someone might find their way back. Not because you called them, but because they saw your light was still there. Thank you for spending your precious time with this story. If it touched your heart, even just a little, we invite you to help us share it with a like, a comment, or by sending it to someone who might need a quiet light today. Your support means more than you know. Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next story waiting to be told. Together, let's keep the light on, for every soul still searching.